Okay, thanks everyone for joining. My name is Ralf Frankemolle. I'm a senior cloud solution architect at VMware. So my primary responsibilities are all things VMware Cloud, that is VMware Cloud on AWS, VMware Cloud Disaster Recovery, and the surrounding products like VMware Cloud Flex Storage or our new ransomware recovery services, things like that. And with me, I brought my colleague Daniel, who's also in my team. Daniel, you want to quickly introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Hi guys. So my name is Daniel. So I'm responsible for the sales for the things as Ralf mentioned as well. So before I joined the solution architect team, I worked for 4 years for now for VMware. And before that, I was technical account manager like Marcel. So I have a whole picture of that as well.
Okay. So a quick change of plans in terms of agenda. I am actually traveling this week, and there has been some time constraints on my end. So once I do the initial presentation, I'll hand over to Daniel for the live demo, which is probably the more important part or exciting part. Should there be anything left open in the Q&A, I'll follow up on these questions after the call, right? Some things happen spontaneously on my end. I didn't want to cancel, but I can't take the full hour that I originally had planned. Okay, I would continue by sharing the presentation if that's okay.
Yes, Ralf, please take over.
Okay, fantastic. Everyone can see the screen, right?
Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Fantastic. Okay, so I picked a very relatively short and straightforward layout for this presentation. Now it's working. So in terms of agenda, we got VMC on AWS, what, why, and how. So what is it, what we're doing there, why are we doing it, and how are we doing that? Then a quick glance at the high-level architecture. So what is the service made up of? Some networking overview, because whenever we are talking about cloud, be that public, hybrid, or multi-cloud, networking becomes important and, well, at times somewhat complex. Then next up, we got a very, very short add-on services overview, right? So I put in a slide with an overview of the add-on services. And should there be any questions to one of these services in particular, we would go into more details into each and every one of those. Then I'll hand over to Daniel, who's doing the live demo, followed by Q&A. Again, I'll probably leave once I get through once I'm through the slide deck. But should there be anything open on the Q&A, I'll follow up with Daniel on that. Okay, so what is VMware Cloud on AWS? So VMC on AWS is VMware's software-defined data center stack, that being vSphere for compute virtualization, vSAN for storage virtualization, and NSX for network virtualization, running on AWS global infrastructure. So it's essentially a bundle of all of our, well, core infrastructure products that are running on AWS bare metal instances in the AWS regions and availability zones. Quick question, is everyone familiar with the concepts of regions, availability zones, so on and so forth in AWS? Is that a fair assumption? Okay, I see a thumbs up, which is good. I'll take.
So one thing, Ralf, we see "Hey guys" in red in the middle of the presentation. I think it's a comment.
That is someone used the annotate function correctly in Zoom. Anyways, okay, so
I'll take a look at that.
Yeah, I just used the annotate and then delete all. It's gone now, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Okay. So right, regions and availability zones. So I'll just assume that everyone knows what that is. So in one of these availability zones or stretched across multiple availability zones, we can deploy these software-defined data centers. This gives us, well, multiple things. First, a VMware service in AWS, which is, well, good for running VMs, but it also gives us two more things, and that is with connectivity to our on-premises infrastructure, this gives us a hybrid cloud experience, all based on the same. Somebody use the annotate function again. Okay. This gives us a hybrid cloud experience with our on-premises infrastructure. On the other hand, the VMs and VMC on AWS also have direct connectivity to various AWS native services, be that S3, EFS, elastic load balancers, so on and so forth. Okay. I need to go here again. Right. Why? If we take a look at common use cases, disaster recovery, I think that's what comes to mind for everyone, right? The cloud is elastic, it's very scalable, so I can provision and deprovision resources as I see fit. So disaster recovery is a big use case of VMC on AWS. Data center extension as well. If you or your customers have a shortage of resources, of maybe space in your data center, I don't know who keeps working with the annotate function in Zoom, but
Is there a way to disable it permanently?
I am not sure.
If you are sharing, maybe you will see it. From more, if you click on more on the top and then disable it, and does it disable it?
Disable annotations for others. I think that should do it. Yeah. Okay, let's see then. Yeah. Data center extension, if you are running out of resources or space in your data center, VMC on AWS is a quick and easy way to increase the amount of available VMware resources, right? Deploying an SDDC takes roughly 2 hours. After that, you got your SDDC up and running. You can connect that up to your on-premises infrastructure and start, for example, migrating with HCX or deploying new VMs over there. This is very, very easy and fast. Cloud migrations, whenever people are doing cloud migrations, they are very, well, optimistic in terms of timelines. After about a year or two, realism sets in and they see, well, it's not that easy getting everything into AWS, right? Especially if we talk about a lift and shift migration, which won't give you a very good experience with AWS in terms of cost and most likely also performance. VMC on AWS makes that easier by taking the VM as it is right now on premises and moving it into AWS global infrastructure. Once we are there, we get to the next point, which is next generation applications. With VMC, we always get Tanzu, right? We get a basic access to our container services on VMware Cloud. But we also have this direct access to the plethora of AWS native services. So if we want to develop or deploy containerized applications, we can do so with AWS native services or Tanzu, right? So in all of these things, VMC on AWS can make a lot of sense for customers. How? Okay, so how's the service delivered? So this is what many of you know as shared responsibility model from cloud providers, and VMC is no different, right? We got at the bottom, we got AWS providing physical infrastructure, security, and the hardware in and by itself, so storage, compute, and network. On top of that, we got VMware with the SDDC stack. I see we have a question. Mike, you want to unmute yourself?
Sorry, that was an accident.
I can hear you now. Oh, it was an accident that you raised your hand.
Yeah.
Okay, then I'll continue. No worries. Okay, so on top of what AWS provides, we got the managed service by VMware. So VMware is taking care of ESXi, of vCenter, of vSAN, of NSX. So all these security updates or upgrade releases, all of these things are taken care of. So no more studying compatibility guides, no more studying upgrade paths, etc. All of that's just taken care of for you. Now the user or the end customer comes in at the top, where it's about creating and managing those virtual machines and the associated guest operating systems. So instead of managing and maintaining infrastructure, you are now consuming the infrastructure by deploying, managing, and lifecycling virtual machines and their applications. So the customer is taking care of authentication, backup, firewalling, all of these kind of things. But the underlying infrastructure is completely taken care of. Now, the high-level architecture. So again, we are talking about AWS regions and availability zones. So an SDDC, as described, is always made up of vSphere, vSAN, and NSX. And an SDDC can be either stretched or non-stretched. Non-stretched SDDCs work within a single availability zone. Stretched SDDCs are stretched across two availability zones, with a vSAN witness being placed in the third availability zone. Now, each SDDC is made up of at least one cluster. Each cluster has at least two hosts, right? So we are working, the smallest possible SDDC would be a 2-node VMC SDDC. The first cluster in each SDDC is a little bit special, as it's our also our management cluster, right? When you deploy VMC on AWS, you will see two different resource pools, one that's dedicated for the management components, that being NSX managers, NSX edge nodes, vCenter, HCX if I choose to deploy it, etc. All of these are placed in the management resource pool, and you get the workload resource pool. That is where you or your end customers' VMs and workloads are running. This is no different between non-stretch and stretch, right? Just the stretch cluster has a higher availability because it's stretched across two availability zones. The SLA is 99.9 for a non-stretch cluster, which is in line to what AWS provides in a single availability zone, and 99.99 for a stretch cluster. Right, so networking options. We got a bunch of different networking options. And again, networking is one of the more complicated or one of the more interesting things to consider when we are talking about VMC with our customers. One of the easiest things we could do is set up a layer 3 VPN. So either a policy-based or route-based IPsec VPN tunnel.
Yeah.
Yep, sorry. Okay, so that means I have my firewall, my gateway on my on-premises side, which has a public IP or a way to connect to the internet, and we connect that up to the public IP of our SDDC. Should the WAN connectivity of this SDDC or the on-premises side, should this be too slow or has too high latency, we can use the AWS Direct Connect and, well, technically also do a layer 3 VPN across that Direct Connect. Direct Connect, I think everyone knows what that is. That is essentially an AWS service to provide a direct connectivity with a specific AWS region. Essentially, you get a router at the source and destination that has a direct line. There's then a public version of this where you will set up a VPN across this to secure your data, and there would also be a private interface version of this. Now, the second option would be a layer 2 VPN, which gives us the option to run the same networks across both sides, right? This isn't necessarily the optimal way if we consider that we still have to have the default gateways of our workloads somewhere, but for certain scenarios, yeah.
Mike, could you please mute yourself? I think that there is a noise coming from your end.
Sorry.
Okay, so layer 2 VPN again might not be optimal, but it is a working setup for certain design or networking scenarios. And last but not least, we got HCX. Now, HCX is a bit of a special situation. Now, HCX is a product hybrid cloud extension, which we use to migrate workloads from a source to a destination. In our case, that being the source, the on-premises side, and destination, VMC on AWS. It also works the reverse, by the way. But with HCX, we can actually do both. We can leverage layer 3 VPNs for workload connectivity once they are migrated, but we can also use HCX to stretch layer 2 domains into VMC on AWS. This comes with some obvious advantages. For example, I wouldn't need to re-IP my workloads post-migration, right? I could, for example, stretch my VLAN, which has a bunch of server workloads, migrate all of these into VMC, and then have them running in VMC with no service disruption whatsoever. So that means I can, well, take care of my migration first, and post that migration, take care of assigning new IP addresses and all of these things. Again, this does come with the downside that we still have our default gateway somewhere, and we might end up in a situation where we hairpin certain traffic, but it's just, well, it's essentially another tool in your and your customer's toolbox to successfully complete a migration. This is what it looks like in the, well, let's say implementation detail. I assume NSXT is somewhat known in this audience. So NSXT has what we call a multi-tier routing support. So we got different tiers or levels of routers, that being the tier 1 and the tier 0, where we would typically, well, abstract security zones or tenants or whatever at the tier 1 level, and the tier 0 level being the tier 0 router being the north-south router. So our outward connections out of the SDDC. In VMC on AWS, it's no different. We have a tier 1 router for the management part that we call the MGW or management gateway. And we have a tier 1 router for the compute part that we call CGW or compute gateway. Now the MGW is somewhat restricted, right? Because remember, we provide a managed service on all of these management components. So we don't want you to fully access these components or open up all the ports in the world to these components. We allow you to set a source, and after that, we only allow you a certain set of services. For example, to the vCenter, you can only open HTTPS, ICMP, and the VMware SSO service. All other services are blocked by default. On the compute gateway, on the other hand, if you create a network in VMC, you create an NSX segment, and these segments by default are always connected to the CGW, so to the compute gateway. On the CGW firewall, you can define firewall rules, well, almost with no limits. I think we display a warning if you just set any on the CGW. But apart from that, you're pretty much on your own, because again, this is firewall for your workload, and according to the shared responsibility model, you are responsible for the firewalling of these workloads. Now, one additional thing that comes with NSX is microsegmentation, or the distributed firewall. You can configure distributed firewalling on each and every SDDC that you deploy, because it's an inherent part of VMC. So for those of you who are not familiar with distributed firewall, it's essentially giving you a way to secure each VM on its own, right? So on the level of the virtual NIC, we enforce certain firewall rules. I can create a rule that says my VM1 can only connect to VM2 via HTTPS. And it does not matter what I allow anywhere else, the distributed firewall is what is assigned first. So if I put an HTTPS allow at the top and an implicit drop below that, that VM will only ever talk to HTTP to other services or VMs via HTTPS, right? So we got distributed firewall and gateway firewall rules, and on top of that, we see the possible connectivities that we have to the outside world. We got VPN and direct connect, which we already discussed. And then we got this orange arrow that says ENI. That's an Amazon Elastic Network Interface, which gives us a direct connection into AWS services. These services are hosted in what we call the connected VPC, so the connected virtual private cloud on the Amazon side. And via this connectivity, we have a very high bandwidth and low latency link. So we're talking about 25 gigabits per second. And as we are in the same availability zone, we are talking about around a millisecond of latency. So these connected VPCs, just to give you a very easy example for what you could use this, imagine you're migrating your VMs into VMC, and you got your infrastructure now taken care of. According to the shared responsibility model, you still need to take care about your backups, right? So to have the backup storage being, well, performant and also cheap, because many other connectivities in AWS are metered connections, you can leverage the ENI. There's no metered connection on the ENI. It's essentially free. So you could use, for example, an Amazon Elastic File Storage and use that to, well, use that to write your backups onto this file storage. Other things may include running a small RDS database. So if you're running Horizon on VMC, for example, Horizon for the connection server, I think is the component, you may need a events database, which is a very small SQL database. Maybe you don't want to manage a VM, a SQL server, and the database just for, let's say, 5, 10, or 20 gigabytes of, well, actual database size. One of the things you can do is spin up an Amazon RDS with Microsoft SQL and use that connection string in your connection server to have a database quickly and easily available without taking care of yet another virtual machine or application in a virtual machine. Now, AddOn services overview. If you log into a VMware Cloud organization, you will see many, many services more. I explicitly only picked those who are working with VMC in some way, shape, or form, right? I didn't include Area or the former vRealize products because these can be used standalone, but I specifically picked those who are working in conjunction with VMC. First and foremost, HCX. Again, it's our product that we use to migrate workloads into the VMC on AWS service. That can be via replication, via live migration. Well, I think that's mostly it, yeah. Next up, we got site recovery. VMware Site Recovery is, well, very similar or basically identical to Site Recovery Manager, which is the on-premises disaster recovery product. But in this case, it's delivered as a service. So it works kind of the same. You get a managed site recovery instance in VMC. You pair that with your on-premises side, and you can start DR protecting your workloads. NSX Advanced Firewall. So again, NSX is part of every VMC deployment, but there are some advanced or additional features that are only accessible with this product add-on. Most notably, this is the identity firewall, commonly used in VDI projects, or for example, the distributed IDS IPS, right? All the other services, distributed firewalling, gateway firewalls, distributed routing, VPN, NAT, etc. All of these are included by default. VMware Cloud Flex Storage. VMC, as mentioned at the beginning, VMC is always built on top of vSAN. Now, vSAN is a fantastic product and works great as long as my compute and storage need scale in a linear fashion, right? As both scales the same way, I can add node by node, and well, vSAN works pretty great for that. Now, if for some reason my storage consumption is dramatically higher than my compute need, the logic with vSAN may get out of whack a bit. So with VMware Cloud Flex Storage, we can attach an NFS data store to VMC to host virtual machines, not only on vSAN, but on an additional NFS data store on cost-effective cloud storage. VMware Cloud DR is our newest, disaster recovery as a service product. It works a bit differently than site recovery because we use a cloud storage to save those replicas or save those backups and recover those on demand once a disaster event occurs, right? VMware Cloud DR is also the product that we base our ransomware recovery service upon, which I'd be delighted to talk about in another VMUG session somewhere in the future in greater detail, because I'd be doing you a disservice in cutting that short. Last but not least, VMware Tanzu Mission Control. So Tanzu in the basic version is included in every VMC deployment, and with that also comes a basic version of Tanzu Mission Control. So Tanzu is what you will enable if you want to run containerized applications on VMC, while Tanzu Mission Control gives you a single pane of glass view of all of your Tanzu clusters and associated policies, right? Are there any questions to any of these services?
So I think, Ralf, I'll start with one. Maybe if you can tell us all about like which services out of these 6 is free and what is charged.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So all of these are add-ons. HCX is free, and the basic version of Tanzu Mission Control is also free. These are the ones that I can just activate. By the way, HCX, if you know that from the on-premises side, you know that there's an advanced and an enterprise license. The functionality that comes with HCX Cloud is compatible to that of an HCX Enterprise, right? You don't need licenses for the on-premises side that you connect up to VMC. right? We talk about a so-called site entitlement. So as long as an on-premises site or another cloud for that matter connects to VMC and AWS, the source site is automatically licensed as HCX Cloud. And for Tanzu, again, it's the Tanzu basic functionality. I'm not really sure where the service cutoff is right now. I'd be lying if I tried to guess. But these are the ones I can just activate. All of the others are paid products.
All right. Yeah. Thank you so much, Ralf. Yeah. So that was because I think these two services are actually new to me as well: VMware Cloud Flex Storage and VMware Cloud DR. And so these are so there is nothing free on these two services, right?
No. Cloud
So
Flex Storage is relatively new, to be honest, right? It's the end of 2022 it got released. VMware Cloud DR is already a bit older, but comparably new to the others, right? VMC and AWS is like 6 years in the market now, I believe, or almost 6 years. VCDR is like 18 months or so. Almost 2 years, I believe.
Maybe in the next sessions, we'll get into detail with, I think, both the services or VMware Cloud DR as it goes. Yeah. Thanks, Ralf.
Yes. All right. I believe, let me see. Oh, yeah, I believe with that, I'm at the end of my presentation. Daniel, I hand over to you now with the live demo.
Yes, thank you, Ralf.
All right.
So guys, hopefully you can see my screen right now.
Yes, Daniel.
Yes.
Oh, perfect. So this is our console where you can log in and create your data center. So as Ralf mentioned, we have to create a data center in the first. So this will take us roughly about 2 hours, and I will show you a little bit of workflow. So you can log in into our VMC console. It's vmc.vmware.com with your credentials. And then you have the button and click create new data center. And this pops up. So what we need basically here is an SDC name. So in my case, it's a test, and the cloud. So it's basically for us that we can divide between Zero Cloud and AWS. What does mean is for us, we have simulation of this workflow, but it does basically the same what it does actually on AWS. So please don't care about that. Below that, we need an AWS region, and you see where the service is actually available. So also Hong Kong, we have several regions in the EU. So Frankfurt is basically for our German customers. I have also customers in Ireland and Paris, and as well in Stockholm. So for our US customers or globally environments, we have also something in US, so in Virginia and Oregon, for example, and you can choose between this one. Then you have the deployment time, and as Ralf mentioned as well, we have for example a single host. Single host, that means we have only one host deployment, but please keep in mind one host deployment is only for testing and expires in 60 days, so no production workload on it. So this is more for the guys who want to play around or want to set up a test dev environment or want to play around with some host types, because in AWS, so in VMC on AWS, we have 3 host types currently. So that means every host brings some resources in this environment. The i3 one is one of the oldest one, and we have the i3N and the i4i. i4 is the newest one with new processors, and this divides a little bit in host capacity. You see here we have a machine with 2 sockets, 36 cores, the half gig of memory, terabyte, sorry, not gig. And if you choose another one, this configuration will also speed up. Don't let me, because this is unavailable at the moment from my account. But you see, there's also a question mark here, and we are getting more capacity, and you have another ratio of capacity in this ones as well for the I4 host. This is one of more compute resource workloads. Okay, so this is one of the host types. So deployment types is single host at the moment, but we can also do a multi-host. Multi-host means that we have one or two and more hosts we can deploy, and you see also the capacity will then raise up in the total capacity here. And as Ralf mentioned, the stretch cluster is for customers or workloads who want to have a higher SLA and who want to stretch between AZs in AWS. So for example, if you want to have a stretch deployment in Frankfurt, this will stretch between AZ2 and 3 or 1 and 3. So you have to stretch your workloads between that. So after next, we have to pair our AWS account, because as well as we can link or interact with our AWS account, this is, for example, with our EMI and our EC2 instances. On the other hand, we need to link this account with our data center. And this is the next step. So that means that we have to run once a time this task and connect the two accounts together, and then basically connect the account and say, okay, we want to make the connection between the two sides. Now it's loading the VPC, so that makes it available in our account and links the SDC between our, you see it here on the right, there's a little picture, our VMware account, and on the right side, our AWS accounts with the VPC and the subnets where the EC2 instances can be running, or the S3 buckets, for example. So I will choose that, also subnet, and next. The next will be the management subnets, and now we have to decide how big this management subnet should be. For example, we have a CIDR range here, so that means 27 hosts or 200, roughly about 250 hosts. This is a little bit crucial because we need to set this management subnet at the beginning from the deployment, and we cannot change it afterwards. So please take care that you, if you want to grow beyond 27 hosts, you need to set the next CIDR range. This management subnet for you is for the vCenter connectivity and NSX manager, as well for the ESXi host in the cloud. So after this, we can click next and say, okay, this is now charging us, and deploy SDC. In real life, this will take roughly about 2 hours. And in the backend now, there will be setting up the host. So that means the host will be provisioned with ESXi, the vCenter will be set up, NSX will be deployed, and as well the vSAN will be connected together. And after that, we are getting our SDC up and running. I will change now the environment so that we don't have to wait. Please bear with me a second. Are there any questions so far? In the meantime. Silence means no.
Yeah, seems like no so far.
Good. So now it's loading. So this is another inventory. So you see, this is a live and up and running SDC. It is in the US East, so in Virginia. We can go into this. And this is the console, what we are getting when the cluster is up and running. So you see, we have one cluster, 3 hosts, and we can, it could be that that we have now the option to open the vCenter because it's up and running. And with this checkbox, we can now open vCenter and copy the cloud credentials. I need to go to another window that I can show you that as well. And to put this one. So now I logged in. So this is the URL for our vCenter. And you see, it's nothing fancy. It's look like the same what you're getting on-prem as well. So it's a vCenter, and surprise, there's the data center and a cluster and 3 hosts. So the host type you see here right now, the hypervisor is ESXi. So the model is Amazon and the i3 version of the host. And they are also running our virtual machines. So nothing fancy right now here. I need to go, I cannot click because there's a window open, I think. So Ralf mentioned as well the network connectivity. In the backend, we can click as well here on networks, and you see we have lots of logical switches and NSX backed up backend switches. So everything what we are doing here with new virtual machines will be sticking in NSXT. So for that, we have a console. Go back to here. And in the console, you see this is the login screen from our vmc.vmware.com. This is the data center, and we have here a networking tab. And under the networking tab, there's everything what we need to control our data center. This is the tier 1 edge, what Ralf mentioned in the show, in the PowerPoint picture, and the compute gateway. So one management gateway for our instances, for example, for our vCenter and NSX. And we have here also a compute gateway for our segments. So segments are logical switches backed up by NSXT in our environment where our virtual machines are connected to. So when we want to create a new network, we can simply click here and say, okay, I want to add a segment, and basically can also configure it like this one. Say, okay, this is the name of the DPS horizon with the subnet and also some ports in it, as well as, for example, DHCP settings as well, and setting up DHCP server. We have also VPN services where we can connect our local or branch offices to this one, route-based, policy-based, and layer 2 VPN. So at the moment, we have everything in the pocket, what we need for making a successful migration as well. One thing what's special here is security. Security is divided in distributed firewall and gateway firewalls. The difference between that, gateway firewalls is everything what is going through our edges, so our gateways, and distributed firewall is for micro-segmentation. So you can also divide traffic between virtual machines which are sitting in the same subnet. For the gateway firewalls, we have here multiple tabs. One is compute gateways and one is management gateways. And one special thing here is if we want to have, for example, incoming network from, for example, for our vCenter, so that we can reach our vCenter via internet. This could be also a possible use case. You can simply add a rule and say, okay, I want to have incoming network here from, do I have here an example? Yeah, for example, this one, vCenter. Oh no, it's not the destination. So it's this one. So vCenter and a low HTTPS. This is all handled here. From the integrated services, this is the site where you can activate, for example, HGX. And from my experience, I use HGX 100% in every customer use case because that makes our lives pretty easy. You can, if it's not activated, there's one click deployment. So that means you click activate and it will simply roll out everything you need for HCX. You will download the appliance to your on-prem data center, connect the two sites and pair it. What this look like is this one, which to this one. And this means this is the dashboard for the infrastructure. For example, this one is site pairing. And if I deploy it and say activate, this dashboard will be available in the vCenter. And I say, okay, I want to add a site and deploy it on my branch office or my on-prem data center and set up the connection between the two sites. I need also not only the connection, also the interconnects where all the traffic is running and service meshes. So that means that we also can set up a layer 2 VPN tunnels between the sites. And then I have the tab for migration. And what I can do here is to say, okay, you see, I have two ways. One is from my data center to another one, and this one is going backwards. So I have the ability to, for example, to push a workload to the cloud and also go back on-prem. And that's really pretty easy. And also you won't have to change anything on the virtual machines. And that's a big use case to fan in and fan out to the cloud. So VMware on the cloud is not a one way. You click on migrate, it's a simple task. You say, okay, we want to, for example, this one is our source. Say, okay, is this one and this one is our migrating virtual machine. Say, add it to our plan. Transfer placements. So where should the resource end up? For example, migration resource pool. Select which storage, workloads, data store storage, and what is the migration profile? And here we have three options. One is vMotion, and you see you have the ability with HCX for simple deployment and do an actual vMotion from your on-prem data center into the cloud and backwards. And that is pretty nice. It's a nice feature, but it's not for all use cases. And to be honest with you, vMotion, yeah, you can do it. It will also work and does a job. But if you want to do, for example, an app migration, 99% I use bulk migration or replicated assistance vMotion. And what it does in the backend is I can group my virtual machines. Here you see migrate 1 and 2, or 11 and 10. And with bulk migration, I can say, okay, I want to have a switchover failure schedule. And with that, I say, okay, I want to start and end with this window. And on the 28th of April, there should be the workload switched off on my on-prem data center and sync to my VMC data center. This will also result in downtime, yes, because virtual machines will be started up again. But with the scheduled option here, it's a pretty nice use case. So now I have everything configured here. I can say, okay, I want to validate. In the backend, there's a validation process. For example, here that it's saying, okay, please be aware that the data store is overcommitted. I can say, okay, this is on your warning. Say go. He will also validate again if there's something others happening. And now with go, with the second time, now the replication will be starting up and the virtual machines will be migrated and then will be, you see, it takes some time and then will be appearing here. Yeah, so this is now my little showcase about what is VMC doing, what is the deployment, and what HX can do and how easy you can manage it. Any questions so far? And for me, we can open the Q&A.